Good morning, everybody. We're just going to give everybody a chance to join. Seconds, I think, and then we'll get started. Number of attendees is starting to stabilize. I think we will get going. So, well, thank you very much for attending this morning. This is one of a number of webinars we've done over probably the last year on the Building Safety Act, and this one is specifically focused on people like yourselves who are our customers, who are suppliers, subcontractors in the UK construction market. And hopefully we're going to be able to give you a bit more insight into the Building Safety Act, and more importantly, give you a view of some of the things that we've been working on to try and enable the industry to be compliant, to improve in a way that's low effort and low cost. And next slide, Nick. So just before I really get into detail, I think it's probably worthwhile just giving you a little bit of an update of the Once for All group. So Constructionline is part of the Once for All group. So Once for All is probably a brand that you are not familiar with. You are a lot more familiar with Constructionline. So Once for All is a company that is pan-European, and we have a number of entities across Europe that are essentially doing very, very similar things, providing the compliance capabilities, assessment capabilities, marketplace, revenue generation capabilities to the UK construction market, to the European construction market. We have obviously Constructionline in the UK. We've also brought into the group Builders Profile, also in the UK a long time ago. Altius. More recently, we bought some businesses in France, which are very similar Constructionline, called Once for All and Actradis. And then more recently, we've made some further acquisitions. A company called Bidwork, which is a tool that we're about to launch, which is a tender management platform for estimators that leverages AI. That has some pretty cool functionality, and very, very recently, as in we've announced in the last few weeks, acquisition of a company called Nalanda, which does exactly like what Constructionline does, but in Spain and Latin America. But the compliance in those areas is much more focused on worker compliance than necessarily organizational compliance. Whereas in the UK, I'm sure you're all aware, the compliance is certainly for companies like us is a lot more focused at the organizational level, and worker compliance is managed elsewhere. The benefit is that as we bring these businesses together, the different requirements that need to be met across Europe, we're able to bring those solutions to all of our customers, regardless of where they are. And there's a number of really positive things that we've got coming down the line, but that's probably not for our discussion today. So the group has now 900 people working across Europe. We have just over 250,000 suppliers, subcontractors, who are on the European platform, whose compliance, etc., is being managed across managed for buyers across the European construction market. We have a huge amount of data within the business, and that enables us to provide some of these services like we're going to be able to show you today. We're essentially managing compliance across 12 countries, mainly across Europe, but now also in Latin America as well. Next slide, please, Nick. So as we move into this, the talking about Building Safety Act in more detail, I can already see some people are starting to put some questions up already. However, just a reminder to everybody, if you do have any questions, please feel free to fire them in. Don't wait until the end. We're going to start to deal with them as we actually work our way through the presentation. So the Building Safety Act is without doubt the most significant change to the UK construction industry from a regulatory perspective and legislative perspective since 1984. What has been surprising is that even now there are a lot of people who are not really that aware of the Building Safety Act. So for the first part of this presentation, what we are looking to do is to give a little bit of a background and kind of take you on a journey so you understand why we have built what we have built. I mean, fundamentally, I think everybody understands, what or probably should understand, why the Building Safety Act came about, because of Grenfell. And I think everybody will see that if you are not au fait with it already, that without a doubt, what is expected is going to drive a very positive change, in the UK construction market, and in your respective organisations, and ultimately it's all about building safer buildings more safely. So with that, well, one thing I should probably say before we get into detail, I'm just going to give you the punchline. The services that we have built and are going to and have been assigned to your accounts, we are not charging anymore. So all of you are gold or platinum members, it's been added free of charge as part of your membership going forward. So your ability to be able to evidence Building Safety Act compliance is now just part of your membership. And the way that we have done it, that you'll see later on, we've really tried to minimize the effort. So I think, I hope as you go through this, just keep that in mind. I don't want people to be thinking, what is this going to cost? This is going to sound like it's loads of effort for us to work with this accreditation. It's not all. So please stick with us till the end, and hopefully you'll be able to see that we have really worked hard to try and minimize the effort for you and your businesses to be able to get to where you need to be. So with that, over to Nick.
Thanks, Rob. So just a bit about me. I spent 25 years working for a contractor, and have spent the last 3 or 4 months working for Constructionline, once for all. So I see a lot of this still with my contractor's hat on. I'm almost poacher turned gamekeeper. So my role in this is to make sure we fully understand the challenges that suppliers are facing, and ensuring our products reflect what you need. So I mean, that's me. I work in Rob's team. I have other skills, but I am good at moving slides forward one when asked to. So the Building Safety Act, the trigger for the Building Safety Act was the awful tragedy down at Grenfell on 1st of June 2017. This was probably the tip of the iceberg, let's say. Anyone involved in health and safety will understand tragedies like this are usually the aggregation of lots of small errors, and probably reflected a system that was failing. And that was what was the findings of Dame Judith Hackitt's Building a Safer Future report found the current system of building regulations and fire safety is not fit for purpose, and a culture change is required to support the delivery of buildings that are safe both now and in the future. That was a key phrase from her report. She made a broad number of recommendations, and when we come on to my next slide, we'll see how they were actioned. But what we are doing is not trying to tackle everything that she was looking at, but 3 key points she made were around enhancing accountability, making sure that there's clear lines of responsibility through the design, construction and management of buildings, to change an endemic culture where programme and cost were prioritised over safety. And remarkably, she felt the need to reinforce that everybody doing their jobs needed to be competent. You would think that that was a given, but her report and her investigation concluded that a lot of people operating within our sector didn't have the requisite skills, knowledge and experience to do the jobs they were being asked to do. So that was the trigger for what we're looking at. And we thought it might be useful just to describe the process by which legislation is enacted in this country. So there's the 3 steps to the left are the important ones. So the Hackitt Report, Building a Safer Future, that was published in 2018, initially found its way into our legislative system by way of draft legislation. That's the Building Safety Bill. So this is the way in which a government brings policy or strategy to bear within the Houses of Parliament. That bill was launched in July 2020, so already 2 years after the Grenfell tragedy. As that moves its way through the process, ultimately being approved by both Houses of Parliament and having received a lot of scrutiny, it becomes law when it achieves royal assent. And so that happened on the 28th of April, 2 years ago. That is statute law. The Building Safety Act requires approval from both houses and becomes primary legislation. And that is really an overarching piece of legislation. But then if we move to the right one more, it's supported by secondary legislation. Now, these are called delegated acts, supporting legislation, secondary legislation. But effectively, what secondary legislation does is add the detail to the primary legislation. Now, supporting the Building Safety Act are numerous bits of secondary legislation, looking at the new higher risk building regime, building control. You know, one piece of legislation wouldn't support everything that the Building Safety Act aimed to do. But the piece of secondary legislation that's important to us today is the snappily titled the Building Regulations, etc. Amendment England Regulations 2023. And it's that document that outlines duty holder responsibilities and competence requirements. And that is what we're focused on. And then I guess the final layer of detail comes in supporting documentation, codes of practice and guidance, really getting into the nitty-gritty of what the secondary legislation requires. The British Standards Institute have in fact, they started developing them before the primary legislation got royal assent. But the British Standards Institute have developed a suite of documents that are specifically aimed at improving competence in the built environment. We'll go through those in much more detail later, but much of what we do, the granular detail, is based on those documents. And I would encourage anyone that is interested to download those documents. And they're not British standards. They are PAS documents or Flex documents, which are almost standard light, but that has much of the detail that you will need to successfully navigate your way through Building Safety Act compliance. So that's just a brief overview of how the legislation comes to pass. So what is the Building Safety Act? Essentially, the Building Safety Act responded to Dame Judith Hackitt's report. It has introduced all manner of things. I'm guessing a lot of people on the call know the concept of the golden thread. That is making sure the right information is available to the right people at the right time. The Act introduced that. The requirement for safety cases for high risk buildings. The building safety levy, which is an additional charge as you go through the building control process that helps to fund remediation work when that's needed. But where we are focusing our attention is the greater and broader emphasis on competence and the right behaviours. This is, you can see the logical step through from Hackitt into the Building Safety Act. I guess competence is dealt with in one section of the Building Safety Act, section 35, and competence as it relates to specific duty holder roles is just one section. So it's a smallish subsection of the Building Safety Act, but an extremely important one, and one that we feel able to move the industry forward with our products. So that's the Building Safety Act.
Just before we go on, we're getting a lot of questions about the same thing, where people saying, does this apply? Does the Building Safety Act apply to me? So really simply, if the activity you do would come under the Building Regulations Act 2010, which for I would say almost all of the people that are asking, the answer to that is probably yes. Then the Building Safety Act does apply. It isn't just high risk buildings. It isn't just new build. It applies to any activity in the build phase and also maintenance phase thereafter, construction as well. So retrofit, etc. It will apply. It will apply to that.
Thanks, Rob. I mean, I guess this slide is just our pitch. This is the bottom line up front. This is the important bit you need to know. Going forward, your organisation, for all building work, not just that deemed high risk, is going to be able to, you need to be able to demonstrate that you've taken all reasonable steps to comply with the Act or the requirements of the Act. All reasonable steps has a specific meaning, as have those contractors who work under you. So it's not just about getting your own house in order. It's about everyone on site having the competence and taking responsibility for ensuring that. So I guess that is just a small snippet of what we are hoping to help you with. These slides used to be at the end of the presentation, but I brought them forward because they tend to make people sort of their ears prick up. So Rob will go through the detail, but clients are going to need to put in place resources and know that everyone on their sites has the competence required to fulfil the duties that they are fulfilling. Main contractors are going to be responsible for anyone doing work on site and ensuring that they have competence they require. So there is an emerging requirement for you to be able to have the competence required and demonstrate it, else you will potentially start to miss out on work. I feel that main contractors and clients are going to want to work with people who can explicitly demonstrate that they have the competence requirements as described in the secondary legislation, and being able to do that easily will be, I guess, if you move act quickly will be a differentiator for your business. So one of the implications of the Building Safety Act is that you will potentially start to miss out on opportunities if you can't demonstrate that you are meeting the Act's requirements. The quote in the pink box is another one from Dame Judith Hackitt, where she effectively identified that enforcement and regulation and the penalties that were dished out for people that weren't complying with their regulations was ineffective. Essentially, the penalties were too small, enforcement was poor. That sentiment has been driven into the Act. There are now, I mean, I'm not a legal expert, albeit we take soundings from Mishcon de Rea. Kizzy Augustin is a respected solicitor in this area. There are a number now of civil breaches. I think most of them relate around the Defective Premises Act, where the period of liability has been extended, but you may well find yourself having to defend yourself against accusations of breaching the Act. Remediation orders, remediation contribution orders, building liability orders, the Defective Premises Act. It's all sorts of ways in which someone might push liability your way in a civil court. I guess the absolute worst case scenario is that you are involved in criminal breaches. Now, the Act gives details of ways in which you could be breaking the law in terms of giving false evidence to the regulator, deliberately breaching building regulations will be classed as criminal acts, whereby the fines are potentially unlimited and a custodial sentence could be a consequence. So if you were found guilty of a criminal offence, these are the potential, these aren't the Building Safety Act sentencing, but these are health and safety sentencing guidelines and corporate manslaughter, which is where Mishcon de Rea believe fines and custodial sentences will be pitched. So what we're looking at on screen here is potential fines for a small business breaching the Building Safety Act. Down the left, you can see there's culpability categories. Culpability is the seriousness of the offence, and the harm category is the offence's potential to cause harm. So we're told that if criminal charges were being pushed, you're likely to be in the high culpability or very high culpability order, with harm category of 1 or 2. So even for a small company, fines would be starting at £100,000 to £250,000, and then with mitigating and aggravating circumstances, that could go up as far as £1 million. So I guess I'm just showing that to demonstrate the potential for really hefty financial penalties. Worth noting that in considering criminal charges, you could be the offence could be due to consent or connivance, i.e., that you knew the breaches were happening and did nothing about it, or actually colluded in breaking the regulations. But more importantly, this could be attributable to neglect on your part as well. So just failure to fulfill your duties would be enough for you possibly to get drawn into a criminal case. And that isn't just companies' house directors, that's directors, managers, secretaries, or other similar officer of the body corporate who's purporting to acting. So essentially, senior managers, through neglect, in a worst case scenario, could find themselves in the dock. So I kind of bring that one forward just because I feel that that's important for people to know that the Act has now got some real teeth. So the secondary legislation, as I say, is where we're focusing our attention, and Rob will go through the detail of that. But there's a few phrases that are used throughout that. So in the context of the Building Safety Act, competence goes beyond CDM type competence of skills, knowledge and experience, but now involves behaviours. Behaviours, slightly more difficult to define, but sort of relates to you not taking on work that you know to be beyond your competence, not taking on work that you know to be defective or not meeting requirements. So skills, knowledge, experience and behaviours is competence. All reasonable steps is a phrase used throughout to describe people's responsibilities, and that means demonstrating diligence, prudence and good faith in fulfilling your obligations around compliance and regulations, risk assessment and mitigation, competence and training. All reasonable steps is quite a high burden of responsibility. So I think it was just worth drawing out that phrase. An organisational capability relates to essentially an organisation's competence, making sure you've got the management systems, resources, processes in place to ensure you and the people working for you are competent in the job, the project, the activity that you're doing. So that is defined within the secondary legislation, actually, organisational capability. So building regulations, I guess I've gone through this really in terms of it fleshes out the detail of the Act. But the secondary legislation does describe various duty holders. Rob, were you looking at?
You do this, and then I'll carry on from the next slide.
I mean, in essence, it's saying there's specific roles that are required to do specific things who require specific competencies. We have a client as a duty holder. We have contractors and designers with specific roles and responsibilities, and principal contractors and principal designers with sort of duties plus above and beyond what contractors and designers need to be doing. I won't go through the exact detail of that, but just to say these are not they're the same titles, but with different responsibilities to those required by those people under CDM. Now, the client can, if they make it explicit, appoint CDM principals into these principal roles, but their duties are distinct. And if you are in one of those roles, you really need to understand what it is you're being asked to do. Something that Mishcon DeRay, I mean, I don't have huge background in the legal profession, but the Building Safety Act, it's the first time that competence has been described from a legal perspective. And the secondary legislation effectively adds the detail of how the Building Safety Act is put into practice. As Rob goes through some of his slides, you'll see he's bringing out specific clauses from this. This is the document that really we have used extensively to develop our products. At that point, I think we're going to delve into the secondary legislation in more detail. So I should pass back over to Rob.
One thing that keeps coming up, Nick, is around demolition. And given your background, you're probably in a better position. I would say that firstly, people, if you work in demolition, you're unsure, you should probably get some advice. But I would say that if you're doing any demolition work that definitely requires any kind of shoring or protection, then that would almost certainly come under the Building Safety Act. But would you say that?
I'd say this advisedly, but I I think demolition comes under the Act, but do you know what? As you speak, I can double check that. I wouldn't want to leave people with a false impression.
Yeah.
I'm not 100% certain.
And then grounds work as well. I think grounds work is definitely would come under building.
Yeah. If it's in relation to a relevant building, yes.
Yeah. Cool. So from a secondary legislation perspective, I'm going to try to go through this pretty quickly because we want to give you a demo. But what we've actually done, basically the Building Safety Act, the secondary legislation, a lot of how it is implemented through amendments to the Building Regulations Act 2010. As Nick said, we have duty holder roles, and then there's specific entries that have been made around competence. So one of the most important ones is this section 11F, and we're going to share the slides afterwards, so you'll be able to click on that link slides and you'll be able to go and look at this yourself. But it says that any person carrying out any building work or any design work must have, where the person is an individual, the skills, knowledge, experience and behaviours necessary, and whether not an individual, the organisational capability to carry that out in the building work in accordance with all relevant requirements, the design work, so the building work to which design relates is built would be in accordance with all relevant requirements. So if your company is doing building work and it is and or are involved in the design process that will result in building work, and the building work isn't just buildings, it can be roads, bridges, etc. It isn't just it's any kind of building work, then this applies to you. And basically what this says is that you as an organization have a responsibility to check that you are meeting the requirements, because it says any person carrying out any building work or any design work. So you have an onus. This is one of the big changes. It says that you have a responsibility to make sure that your organization, the people in your organization, have got the right skills, knowledge, experience, and behaviors to be involved in that process. And where we talk about organizational capability, it means that organization has the right management policies, procedures, systems, and resources to make sure that they meet those requirements. Next slide, please, Nick. Now, there's very similar for principal designers and principal contractors, where it says the principal designer role must have as an individual, the skills, knowledge, experience, and behaviors necessary, and or the organizational capability. Now you were probably already asking, what does it mean to have the skills, knowledge, experience, and behaviors necessary? It's quite useful, as Nick alluded to earlier on. There are guidance documents that have already been published, and we'll show you some of those in a second. Next slide. So principal contractor is pretty much exactly the same as principal designer. Next slide. And now this is very important, because what this starts to talk about is supply chain competence. So it says that the regulation applies where a person P, now the way that legislation is written, the use of person is interchangeable with a company, firm, etc. So the regulation applies where a person P is proposing to use any person A to carry out building work or design work. Before permitting A to carry out the work, P must take all reasonable steps to satisfy themselves that A fulfills the requirements in 11F, the general competence requirement. So so what that means is that you as organizations, if you subcontract anything, you have a responsibility to, it doesn't matter where you are in the chain, if you subcontract to somebody, you have a responsibility to make sure that that firm meets the general competence requirement. Likewise, if you are supplying or being a subcontractor to any entity, I guess, above you in the supply chain, you are, if not already, are very likely going to start being asked to confirm that you meet the general competence requirement. So the way that the Act has been put together, it's now changed so that not only do the people, because you come down the chain, all have responsibility for people below them, they've now also got responsibility on themselves to be able to say, yes, I know that I meet the general competence requirement for the Building Safety Act, and additionally that for principal designers and principal contractors, they also have specific requirements on them that we can go through in a second. So we go through to the next slide. So as Nick said, we've got the Building Safety Act, which came out, which got royal assent in April 2022. We've had the secondary legislation that has come in August 2023. Now, quite usefully, the industry had already been working on guidance documents around competence requirements. So there is a document called BSI 8670 Flex version 3, which provides basically overall competence framework for the UK construction industry, and it's what's called, this is the general competence requirement. So the principles within this document are what apply to everybody. It doesn't matter whether you're a principal designer, principal contractor, contractor designer. This applies to your organization. Now, if you act as a principal designer or a principal contractor, in addition to that, there are a set of competence requirements that are defined under 8671 and 8672. And now, obviously, if you are a principal designer and principal contractor, it's very likely that you are going to have, you're going to subcontract out or use other firms to provide materials, etc. Then 11E will apply, and they have a responsibility to make sure that anybody that they're subcontracting to, as an example, meet the general competence requirement. Next slide. So I haven't looked at 8671, but it's broadly the same as 8672. And given that a lot of people on here are going to be probably going to be subcontracting to a principal contractor or be in the chain, I thought it was important to just pull out a couple of aspects that really emphasize the importance on this supply chain management that's now included. So I'm not going to go through all of it, but broadly we can see that there's an expectation that a principal contractor has to have a very transparent procurement process, and they have the flexibility, and I think it is definitely a flexibility, to be able to assess proportionately the competence of contractors and suppliers. So now, proportionally, what does that mean? So through working with the industry, we've kind of worked around proportionality as being the size of the firm and the type of work that they're undergoing, whether it be standard construction, as we've called it, or high risk building, high risk trades, where naturally you would expect that the larger a firm is, or the higher risk of activity that they're undergoing, the greater level of sorry, can you just go back a slide?
Sorry. Yeah.
The greater level of standard and expectation that should be achieved. So, and this is something that we factored into the work that we've done, because obviously if we applied the same expectations, that if if we said that a 2 billion turnover firm needs to have all of these policies and procedures, and we said that even if you're a 200,000 turnover firm, you have to have the same things. Obviously, what would happen is that all of the smaller companies would obviously just almost never get compliant, because they don't have the resources or probably the need to be at that same level of approach that the larger companies have. The other thing that's also quite important is that it really puts an emphasis on the principal contractor to look at the skills, knowledge, and experience of people that are working for them, especially those that are working for them, either within the company, but also subcontracting them, to be aware of any gaps in competency. And competency isn't just isn't just, can they do the specific activity that I'm asking them to do? It's also about, if we look at the one below that, 5.5, it's also about people being aware of the legal and moral duties. So, what are the gaps around, whistleblowing policies, and is that appropriate? And does that mean that principal contractor need to try and get some kind of development plans in place to make sure that the people working for them, that they're subcontracting to, have the right policies and procedures in place that they can stand up and say, we made sure that proportionally people had the right legal practices, moral practices in place that would mean that we're able to ensure that we're building safer buildings more safely. Next slide. And this is, yes, so what do our members need? So as we can see here, and I've kind of covered it already, everyone involved in construction, build or design, needs to have the ability to assess their own proportional compliance against BSI Flex 8670V3, the general competence requirement. And this is a big area that we've really focused on, and we'll be able to show you very shortly how we've dealt with that. Anyone contracting with a firm, so down for building or design work, must confirm that that firm is compliant against the general competence requirement. So that's 11E. So the first one is 11F, next one's 11E. And then from a principal contractor, principal designer, they need to have a transparent proportional competence assessment of the suppliers and subcontractors. They need to make sure that they've taken reasonable steps to ensure that any organisation carrying out work under their control is sufficiently competent, and they need to be able to identify and address gaps and behaviours of those working for them or directly appointed by them. Next, so the things people keep asking. You can go on to the next slide. So just before you go on, Nick, people keep asking about. This seems to be more focused on high-risk buildings, and it's not focused just on high-risk buildings. The Building Safety Act applies to all construction work. Anything that comes under the 2010 Buildings Regulations Act, be it build work or design work, it applies to that. It's just that for high-risk buildings, there is actually a greater level of expectation. So there's a higher standard of what the competence should be. There's a higher standard of what the behavior should be. There's a higher standard around things like the reporting to the central bodies around high-risk buildings, and there's a greater emphasis on the capture and management of data throughout the life cycle of high-risk buildings. But just to re-emphasize, it applies to all construction work. Nick.
Okay, so we'll get through this quickly because I guess we want to get onto the good stuff, which is the product demo. But working with industry, so bodies like the Joint Competence Initiative for the envelope sector, and with our sort of long-standing customers, we've developed 2 Building Safety Act assessments. I guess where we can help is that we understand that you already put an awful lot of work into the other assessments, are gold assessments, social value, and a claim, and we have that information already, so we can make the process of demonstrating your Building Safety Act compliance slightly less painful, I guess, by leveraging the information that we have already about you. That's not brought up that slide. What's going on there? Oh, we've got oh yes, we've got animations. That's what happens when you don't put the slide together yourself. So whilst we are saying that the Act applies to all construction, clearly there is a category of building work, higher risk buildings, that has a very explicit definition based around use criteria, the legal definition, that is it a building, is it an independent building, and the height of the building, 18 metres and 7 stories. There is a slightly different burden of requirement for higher risk buildings than standard construction. So we've felt the need to have two distinct assessments, one that demonstrates that you meet the requirements for all standard construction, and one aimed at higher risk buildings. And Rob will describe how the compliance requirements for some of the questions that we ask varies between those two goals. So there'll be two goals, and they're the icons that you'll see. And because these goals use information from our gold assessment, you cannot be, actually, I might leave that for Mike to discuss. So the questions we're asking within those assessments, as Rob has said, are sort of the skeleton that we've based this on is the Flex 8670 document that describes general competence requirements in the built environment. So the bullet points here: behavioural competence, fire and structural safety, knowledge management and communication, building and systems are 4 of the 5 criteria that are demanded by that document. There's another bullet point we aren't addressing, which is around managing buildings in occupation. But the questions we're asking already, and additional Building Safety Act questions that we ask, are really based around those 4 categories, as well as a specific category around higher risk building infractions, which is a requirement of the Act for clients to ensure that people working for them haven't had their sort of health and safety infractions or been involved in court proceedings, I'm guessing. So it's a comprehensive set of questions based around that. And I think we're just going to touch on the detail of how the proportionality assessment works. I'll hand back over to Rob at that point.
And obviously the key thing there as well is that, you know, if you are already assessed to gold or a claim on our health and safety standard and you special value, there's only 34 additional questions that are needed for the standard construction, and then 4 additional for the high risk building. So we've really tried to minimize down the effort required on people to achieve compliance. But from a proportional assessment perspective, I think it's pretty straightforward. As I said, we take into account the size of a firm and also the type of work that they're undertaking, so whether it's standard construction or high risk building. So as we can see here, you know, for the question, do you have a whistleblowing policy? Essentially, for everybody that's above micro company, so 2 million, so 1.7 million turnover or above, the expectation is that everybody, regardless of whether they've got on a high risk building or standard construction, that they must have a whistleblowing policy. For micro firms, the expectation is that for high risk buildings, yes, they should have a whistleblowing policy, but for standard construction, they can, or they don't necessarily have to have. So if they for the standard construction, if you're under 1.7 million, you said I don't have a whistleblowing policy, you would still be compliant for the standard construction, but not for the high risk buildings. Next slide. And just a few. We can already see I think we've had over 3,500 firms that have already started to go through the process of becoming compliant and filling out the questions. And we can also see that some of the big areas where we're seeing non-compliance, but they're easily addressable things. So we're seeing that for generally, we're seeing quite a few firms for both standard construction, high risk buildings, where they don't have a whistleblowing policy and they're not training out to staff. Now that's like probably a couple of hours work for somebody to address that. Do you have an anti-bribery policy? Similar, it's not a huge amount of work to be able to undertake that. Do you have a corporate and social responsibility policy for firms over 1.7 million turnover for standard or high risk buildings? Once again, that's probably not a huge amount of work for somebody to deal with. Do you have a cybersecurity certificate or a policy? So this is one of the specific requirements of Building Safety Act. We've set that as for firms over 8.6 million turnover, that they should have that. Below that, they don't need to. Once again, that's probably not a big piece of work for somebody to get in place for a firm of that size. And likewise, do you have a net zero policy or roadmap? It only applies to firms with 8.6 million turnover. So if you're below that, you don't need to have it. But firms above, the expectation is that you should do. So with that, we should probably hand over to Mike to quickly do a demo so the people can see.
Thanks, Rob. Okay, good morning, everybody. Hopefully, the screen that you're seeing in front of you now is familiar to everybody. It is the manage your compliance section of Constructionline. And really, just before I jump into the demo, just to recap on probably some of the key points that have been covered this morning. Firstly, the main contractors that we work with, that use Constructionline, that you work with, ultimately, they're looking to ensure that where they are subcontracting work, those businesses that they're subcontracting to comply with the Building Safety Act. And if not now, increasingly over time, that is going to become a factor in awarding business. So I think, as Nick was saying, it's going to become a factor that's important to you to ensure that going forward, your business is in the right place to continue to win and grow and have business with the main contractors that you work with. I think the second point is that we've introduced these goals, and you can see if you are a gold or a platinum member on Constructionline, then you will have got the Building Safety Act, high risk buildings, and the Building Safety Act standard construction goals included as standard as part of your subscription. As Rob mentioned, there is no additional cost to this. We recognize that this is an important thing that the industry is trying to do, and we want to support you and the industry in delivering on that. The two goals that we do have, as I mentioned, are higher risk and, importantly, standard construction. A lot of the questions that were being asked related to whether this applied if you weren't working on high-risk buildings. I think Rob and Nick have both touched upon the fact that actually the Building Safety Act pretty much covers all or a lot of buildings, and therefore it's important that we provide that distinction between higher risk and the standard construction. Now, there are, with the introduction of any goals, going to be some additional questions. Nick said 34 for the standard and 38 for the higher risk. But the good news is that actually most of the evidence that's required to demonstrate compliance and competency has already been provided as part of the work that you've done to become gold or platinum compliant for Constructionline. And we've developed a system, which was a lot of work in the background to pulling not only the question set together, but how these questions actually work with the information that's already been shared. And what we've been able to achieve is we can bring those questions into the context of the Building Safety Act, so that from a main contractor point of view, or if you're subcontracting from any of the subcontractors that you're going to be working with, you can actually see all the information brought together in one place, and you don't actually have to go through the gold or the platinum sections, the health and safety section or the social value, and see whether all the relevant information has been answered. It's all been collated together. But importantly, to the last point that Rob made, we've made it proportional so that this isn't a one-size-fits-all set of questions. If you're a smaller business and you're not working on higher risk buildings, then your focus will be ensuring compliance with the standard construction. If you're a larger organization and you're working on high risk, then clearly the evidence required of you and the degree of competency burden is much higher. But it is there to assist and help with completing it. Now, there are going to be some changes to these BSA goals over the course of the next few months. The Common Assessment Standard that Constructionline Gold and Platinum are part of is introducing a section of questions for BSA specifically, and again in exactly the same way as we're doing with the whistleblowing, the anti-bribery, and the other questions that Rob mentioned, we will pull those through. But we felt it was important to actually get the goals into Constructionline in front of our customers so that actually you can begin to see what is required and actually, begin on that path towards becoming compliant. So in the last few minutes, what I wanted to show is really just to demonstrate how those sharing of questions actually work. So I'm going to pick up whistleblowing policy, which happens to be sitting in the enhanced corporate and professional standing. And from memory, not that I go in here every day, but I do believe it's down towards the bottom. And yeah, here we go. So you'll see here the reference 7348, 1625. Those are numbers just to bear in mind, but I've answered here, do you have a whistleblowing policy? Yes. Provided details, in this case, it's just saying test, and I've uploaded any relevant documents. Now, that's completed as part of my Constructionline Gold assessment. But if I now go down and navigate to the Building Safety Act, high-risk buildings, I can see that within the building safety policies and procedures set of requirements, if I go and edit those, then actually the same questions do have a whistleblowing policy. Reference 7348, 1625 has pulled those answers forward. But also importantly, what it's telling me is that the criteria for this question, and this is how proportionality changes and how the Building Safety Act goals and the context come into play. It's saying that actually in the Common Assessment Standard, it might have been acceptable for me to say yes or no. But actually for the Building Safety Act goal, the criteria here is that I must answer yes. Now, if I change my answer to yes here, that will be reflected back into the your gold or platinum assessment as well. But the simple act of pulling through information whilst bringing it all together into context for the Building Safety Act is going to significantly reduce the effort required on your part in order to become compliant. And that's something that we've been working very hard to achieve, because we know that A, Building Safety Act compliance is important, but B, that there is a lot of effort required, and whatever we can do to minimize that is important. Okay, so hand back to you, Rob and Nick, and if there are any questions or if there's anything else that you want to cover off.
No, so Nick, do you want to take it back? So just closing off. So we've got the Building Safety Act Hub on our website. There's a lot of information on there. There's already been several white papers that have been written. There's a white paper specifically looking at the compliance and competence requirements for the Building Safety Act goal that's going to be published very, very soon. We're also about to publish a detailed deep dive and question by question view, the way you'll be able to see for this question, for this type of activity, for this size of firm, this is what the expectation is of the standard, so you can understand what it is you'll need to get in place, or just to help you understand, where the standard is heading. Next slide, please. As I said, if you can go to the Building Safety Act Hub, but if you have any questions, please email to support at Constructionline. So we're literally coming up to the last minute. We've tried to get through as many questions as we can. We will get the questions, update the missing ones, and we'll share those out to everybody that's attended as well. So hopefully you have found this useful, and I would definitely recommend you start answering the Building Safety Act questions. The idea will be that once we get the additional Build UK questions in, you'll be able to answer those, and then you'll be able to essentially be able to evidence that you're meeting this industry standard, and hopefully that will make it easier for you to be able to evidence compliance with your customers, make it easy for you to show that you've taken reasonable efforts to assess your own competence, and more importantly, hopefully it's going to help you differentiate, as Nick said, such that you can make sure that you're winning more business going forwards. So with that, thank you very much for everyone for attending, and I do hope that it has been useful to you. Thank you very much.